This is the video for Hey King, Get Off Our Backs. Turn in your packets to the page that says Hey King, Get Off Our Backs. Have a pen, pencil, or highlighter ready, and be ready to mark the text as we go through this reading. Give Me Liberty or Give Me Death by Patrick Henry. Really? Was it that bad? By 1776, the American colonists living under English rule thought so. In fact, things were so bad that they went to war to gain their independence. But why? What could have been so intolerable? The first Englishmen came to America 400 years ago looking for gold, silver, and a waterway to Asia. They were a part of a trading company that convinced the King of England to grant them a charter, giving them permission to set up a colony in America. But they did not find what they were looking for. Times got so hard, those first settlers had to eat rats and even each other to keep from starving to death. Pretty soon, though, more people arrived and times got better. The English were here to stay. So underline or highlight what a charter means in that paragraph. Hail to the king. Back in England, the king probably figured he had a pretty good deal. Other people got seasick sailing across the ocean to settle in untamed land while he sat in his palace ruling England. Except that being king just wasn't what it used to be back in the 1200s. A king could really do what he wanted. But this was the 1600s, and now the English people had representatives in Parliament who made laws and stood up for people's rights. Underline or highlight that Parliament who made laws and stood up for people's rights. They even gave advice to the king. Bah. So, where it says Parliament, I want you to put an equal sign and put legislative branch, or write legislative branch below it with an arrow pointing up to Parliament, because they're the lawmakers in England, just like the Congress, the Senate, and the House of Representatives are our lawmakers in America. You don't mind if we govern ourselves, do you? In America, the colonists needed some kind of government to deal with everyday problems. After all, the king was on the other side of the ocean. And because of Parliament, the colonists were used to having a say in government. In Virginia colony, the first settlers decided each community should have 2 representatives and that all the representatives would meet together. Farther north, in Plymouth, the colonists signed a compact agreeing to form a majority rule government where all the men would vote on whatever issues came up. Women didn't get to vote in the 1620s. Even so, the king still controlled the colonies, and the colonists had to follow England's laws. So I want you to underline or highlight, the colonists signed a compact agreeing to form a majority rule government where all men would vote on whatever issues came up. Underline that part of the sentence. And then, remember, we went over this, it's called the Mayflower Compact. So I want you to write that in the margin next to it, Mayflower Compact. Maybe like a little arrow pointing to the bottom half of that paragraph. We're doing just fine, thanks. England had a lot of other colonies besides those in America, and plenty of other problems to deal with. The king and Parliament didn't have much time to pay attention to American colonists. By the mid-1700s, there were 13 colonies, and each colony had its own government. These little governments grew stronger and more used to being in control. When problems came up, the colonial governments took care of things themselves. The colonists were out on their own, making their own decisions, governing things the way they wanted to, without much interference. So they started out with just one colony that kind of was running its day-to-day life, running what's happening there, and then sending some money back to the king. But then eventually it became 13 colonies, and each one had its own government, and those governments got stronger and stronger and stronger. But they were still following the king back in England at this time.
How many do you see, Henri?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
English, Henri, not French.
I'm counting the English.
How many are there now?
Too many. There mustn't be a soldier left in England. What should we do?
What should we do? The British are occupying Boston. I've got to get this to the Gazette right away. Come on, Henri.
Seem a shame. On the evening of 16 December, the year of our Lord 1773, cowardly bandits, disguised as Indians, attacked the Dartmouth, a ship flying the colors of His Majesty King George III. And who is responsible for inflaming the subjects of Boston to this violence? None other than the man before us, the esteemed Benjamin Franklin. His crimes are enormous. The East India Company lost hundreds of crates of tea worth many thousands of pounds. This lawlessness was encouraged by Dr. Franklin in his speeches and writings. His inflammatory paper, the Pennsylvania Gazette, continues to foment sedition, rebellion, violence, treason. You have no honor, sir. You are a scoundrel, sir. Have you nothing to say for yourself?
The heart of a fool is in his mouth, but the mouth of a wise man is in his heart.
Ah, the famous Franklin wit. Perhaps I need to remind you, a rope is the proper reward for treason.
Page 2. A raw deal. By then, times got tough, and the British government went looking for money. Great Britain, which now included both England and Scotland, saw its colonies around the world as a source of profit. Colonies were places to cut timber, grow crops such as cotton and coffee, and mine for valuable minerals. The king forced the colonists to sell these raw materials back to England at really cheap prices. People in England would use the materials to make finished products. But did the colonists get a bargain on these items because they provided the materials? No way. The king forced the colonists to buy the finished products at extra high prices. So what they're saying is the colonies were a way for the king back in England to make money. So they would set up colonies in America where they would cut down all the trees and do a lot of farming. And they would send all of the stuff that they made, all the stuff that they grew, all the trees, all the lumber, all the finished foods, the dyes, everything they make, they would send it back to Britain and sell it to them really cheap. And then Great Britain would turn it into chairs and desks and finished foods and everything, and then sell it back to the colonies at a really high price. So they were buying the stuff from them cheap and then selling it to them more expensive. But they weren't allowed to buy or sell to any other countries because it was a British colony. So it really wasn't a fair deal for them. Looking for a fast buck. That was only the beginning. In the mid-1700s, Britain fought 2 expensive wars. Britain had taken out a lot of debt to pay for the war, so it went looking for a way to make money fast. Taxing the American colonists seemed like the perfect idea. So in 1765, Britain passed the Stamp Act, which forced colonists to put expensive tax stamps on all legal documents, as well as newspapers, calendars, and almanacs. Underline or highlight that. Britain passed the Stamp Act, which forced colonists to put expensive taxes on all legal documents, as well as newspapers, calendars, and almanacs. The colonists had an answer for that. They quit buying British goods. But this boycott didn't work for long. Britain repealed the Stamp Act after 1 year, but things did not get better. So pretty much Great Britain put an extra tax. So every time you bought a newspaper, every time you bought a calendar, every time you had a legal document, you had to pay an extra tax. And it was a pretty decent sized tax. And they were going to make the Americans pay this tax on all the stuff that they bought already normal day to day as a way to make money for the king real fast. Well, the Americans didn't like that idea. So what they did is they stopped buying all British paper goods. They stopped buying newspapers, they stopped buying calendars, and they boycotted. They didn't buy it. They refused to take part in this new tax, so they boycotted buying those items, And eventually, Britain had to take back the Stamp Act because they weren't making the money they thought they would with it.
Before the American Constitution came the American Revolution. It was a result of disputes over taxes, territory, and lot salute between Great Britain and the colonists. Ready? Here's the list. At first, colonists joined British soldiers in a war which was fought over territories. France and Britain had the eye on. Native Americans were on the French side, and colonists said, with Britain we will ride on, and if you win, then we can reside on the territory, Ohio River Valley. Britain said yes, if you are an ally, but when Britain won, they changed, you see. Proclamation 1763, forbidding colonists to that area. That was the beginning, it just got scary. You see, the war cost Britain lots of money. Sometimes money makes people funny, so they decided to tax colonists on a bunch of things. Here is the list. 1764 was the time they taxed coffee, sugar, and wine. Colonists against this made a pact to boycott sugar, the Sugar Act. Sons of Liberty made a proclamation, no taxation without representation. Britain was mad, so they made it hard and taxed newspapers and playing cards. Then they said, our soldiers you must feed. The colonists were angered by Britain's greed. Another boycott, more resistance by colonists who were persistent. Committees of correspondence were formed to keep the colonists informed. The Townshend Act, more tax on tea, but the colonists wanted to be free, so more boycotts Britain could not collect, so they sent soldiers to demand respect. Then in Boston, a massacre, colonists were killed, tempers did stir. Britain then sent tea to Boston, but colonists dressed as Indians snuck on the ship, dumped tea in the river. The Boston Tea Party made Britain quiver. Britain was angry to the max, so they made the intolerable acts. They banned meetings and closed the port, but colonies gave their support. Rallied as one, sending food to Boston. More tea parties occurred more often, and in 1774 the colonies all met and said no more in Philadelphia to protest. First Continental Congress, pledging boycotts, a declaration. Colonists had rights in this new nation, but colonists knew to demand their rights, they'd have to put up a real good fight. They stockpiled guns and ammunition, organized militia for a revolution. 1775 was the time when British soldiers who stood in a line were arresting men. Then in Lexington, they got attacked by Minutemen. Now Minutemen were ready in a minute, rebel fighters in it to win it. A battle in Concord, more in store, all led to Revolutionary War. Now we're all proud in the USA, but let's not forget those who paved the way.
From bad to worse. As soon as the Stamp Act was gone, the British passed the Declaratory Act, saying that the colonies were dependent on the king and declaring that all laws passed in the colonies had no effect. So underline or highlight that sentence. Pretty much what they were saying is they were trying to take away the colonies' rights to govern themselves. So they had set up all these rules, all these laws in their own colonies for how things would work while you lived there. And the British government was seeing how, the king was seeing how they were getting so strong. So he passed an act saying all the laws and rules they made don't count. You can only listen to my rules. As if that weren't bad enough, Britain also passed the Townshend Revenue Act, taxing things it knew the colonists couldn't make for themselves: paint, glass, paper, lead, and tea. This act would also allow British government workers to search people's houses and even break down doors to seize items the homeowners hadn't paid taxes for. So underline or highlight that. The Townshend Acts and what was being taxed: paint, glass, paper, lead, and tea. Because all the factories were back in Britain that would be making these. So they were finding stuff they couldn't boycott, stuff that they had to buy because they needed it. On top of that, the Quartering Acts of 1765 and 1774 forced certain colonists to let British troops live in their house. So underline or highlight that. Quartering Acts forced certain people to let the British troops live there. So you had to feed them, let them live in your house, and take care of them, even if you could afford, it doesn't matter if you could afford to or not. The soldiers didn't even have to pay rent. Then, in the 1770s, a series of laws cracked down on the rebellious activities in Massachusetts colony. Colonists called these the Intolerable Acts because they were getting fed up. They were saying this is intolerable, this is ridiculous. So as you can see, the king needed money, so he started taxing the Americans more, all the American colonists, trying to take their money, make them, and he already wasn't, he was already buying their stuff from them for cheap and then selling it back to them more expensive. So he was already making money off of them, but now he wanted to tax them for more money. And then he started taking away, certain rights that they had, not allowing them to make their own rules, not allowing them to have their own government anymore. Enough is enough. The colonists finally decided there was only one solution: self-government. On July 4th, 1776, the colonists adopted the Declaration of Independence, announcing that the United States was free from Great Britain. It wasn't that easy, though. It was a small matter of fighting a war against the British to make that freedom real. When the Americans won the Revolutionary War, Britain lost all of the colonies. The United States of America was born. So underline, Declaration of Independence announcing the United States was free from Great Britain. You have now finished the close read and the marking of the text. You need to continue on with the handouts that are following this in the packet, the next page, front and back, using this close read to help you answer it. After that, go back and check anything from earlier in the week you have not finished and go ahead and complete it.